Hello everyone, it's Marianne Taylor, aka the House Detective here, and this is my top 5 finds where I take you through some of the most interesting or unusual discoveries that I've made during my house history research. This week I am going to be focusing on the Brisbane suburb of Moorooka, and I'll be talking about this US Army camp that was established there during the Second World War, which I knew nothing about until I came to research a house nearby. And I'll be discussing the history of that house as well, which was an amazing 1930s house, very modern for the time. I'll also be talking about the housing estate that this house was sitting in, the Coniston Park Estate. There's this beautiful map that I'll be showing about that and discussing where the streets in that estate got their name from. I'll also be giving you an update on the photo search for a mansion on Brunswick Street in the Valley. So in episode 25, I mentioned that I was looking for a photo of this old mansion that has been demolished, and spoiler alert, one of my subscribers on here found a photo for me, so I'll be showing you that. Finally, if you follow me on social media, and if not, why not? You will have seen that I went to Government House recently, so I thought I would do a little bit of a segment on the history of this incredible house at Paddington. It was originally known as Fernberg, and it's a fascinating story, but even better than that, I found some fantastic old photos, even old drawings of it, and some photos of the interior, so I'll be sharing those here with you as well. So let's get straight into it. I hope you enjoy watching, and if you do, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button. So last year I was hired to research a house at Moorooka. Now I thought I had a pretty good knowledge of this suburb, but it turns out that I had absolutely no idea that there was a massive American military base established here during the Second World War. So the house that I was researching was quite near the edge of this, and when I went to look at aerial photographs of the house, I discovered that between 1936 and 1944, a massive camp was established at Moorooka, and it was a US Army staging camp. Now, to find out more, once I saw this, I went to the #1 resource for military history in Australia, which is Peter Dunn's wonderful Oz at War website. It is a treasure trove of military history on there, and I'll put a link in the description if anyone else is interested, but I take no responsibility for the amount of time you'll probably spend on there. But sure enough, he had a page on this camp. The camp was located on the eastern side of Beaudesert Road, and it was south of Mayfield Road and north of Bracken Street, but it also extended almost all the way to Tarragindi Road in the east as well, and then a little bit further south as well. It sort of wrapped around that area, so it was a huge base. The page told me that it was a USA SOS camp. Now, I had absolutely no idea what that was, so I had to Google it, and it stands for United States of America. I did get that part. Services of Supply. Now, this was a division of the American Army that was, the blanket term was in terms of supplying, but it was so much more than that. But it was a major logistics division of the US Army, and this was one of their staging camps. So they had a number of camps all over Australia and in Queensland during the Second World War. This might sound like a strange place for Americans to have bases, but in fact, the South Pacific area was a key strategic location in the Second World War. And those of you who know your Brisbane military history or have perhaps been to the MacArthur Museum in the CBD will know that General Douglas MacArthur, who was the American in charge of the Southwest Pacific area in the Second World War, he had his headquarters in what are now MacArthur Chambers in the CBD. So he managed the military operations of the US Army in the South Pacific area from Brisbane. So it was an incredibly important location during the Second World War. And this staging camp out at Moorooka was one part of that puzzle. But anyway, I just thought that was so fascinating and I thought that I would share that with you. But what I also came across on the Oz at War page was these great recollections that apparently the soldiers from that camp would undertake drill operations driving around the dirt roads of the nearby suburbs. So I couldn't help but think that maybe the residents in this house were probably not too happy to have this massive camp built next to them after they built their lovely new luxurious house. But I was wondering, maybe the single young women of the area were not so upset to have the camp full of men in uniform nearby. The Coniston Park Estate. So the house I was researching at Moorooka, as I mentioned, was just to the south of where this camp was established, and it was located on what was portion 198 in the parish of Yeronga. That was the official description. This large portion of land, which measured 20.5 acres, was purchased from the Queensland government by John Robertson in 1864. So this portion covered the area. The southern boundary was sort of halfway through where Moorooka State School is, and it stretched from Beaudesert Road in the west all the way east to approximately where Vassie Street is, and then it just extended slightly north of today's Bracken Street. And as was common with most land in Brisbane and across Queensland, these big portions of tens or hundreds of acres would be sold by the Queensland government, and then gradually over the decades they would be subdivided down, and eventually most of them became residential size blocks. So 16 or 32 perches was the general size of a suburban block in Brisbane. This was exactly what happened with this land. Robertson and subsequent owners gradually subdivided it up, first into larger blocks and then into residential blocks. And Simon Kelly purchased 12.5 acres of Robertson's former land in 1924. Now, Simon Kelly was a publican. He ran the Victory Hotel at Koroy and also the Prince Alfred Hotel at Petrie Terrace, so on the corner of Petrie Terrace and Caxton Street. And it's now called the Lord Alfred, not the Prince Alfred. It got an upgrade, and if you're my age, you will remember it being Hotel LA. It's still there, which is really cool, although it's been changed somewhat. The verandas have been built on and that type of thing, but it is still there, which is amazing, and it's still called the Lord Alfred, so that's really cool. Simon was also heavily involved in the Queensland Irish Association, and he had married Margaret Donovan in 1913, and they lived on part of that 12.5 acres of land at Moorooka. Simon retired from managing pubs in 1927, and sadly he didn't get to enjoy his retirement for very long because he died the following year, probably from cirrhosis of the liver. No, I don't really know that. I just made that up, and no offence to Simon Kelly's descendants if they're around. By the time Simon died, the land, that 12.5 acres, had been subdivided into estates, so it had been surveyed and laid out, including a number of streets, but they were yet to sell any of the land. So following Simon's death, his wife Margaret inherited the land, and then she progressed with the sale of that property. And this is where the Coniston Park Estate comes into it. So that was what they christened the estate, and that was what they marketed it under. As was common at the time, they would choose a nice name for the residential estate sales. Now, I'm not sure where that Coniston Park name comes from. Both Margaret and Simon were Irish, and there's a couple of Conistons in Ireland, and there's one in England, and there's also a Coniston Park it's a suburb of Cape Town. So I'm not sure where that name for the overall estate comes from. Maybe some of you will know more about that if you've got an Irish background. Maybe there's some family connection. As I mentioned, a number of roads were laid out as part of this estate development, and they were named after Simon and Margaret's daughters. So they had 4 daughters. There was Mary Sherlock Kelly, who was known as Shirley. There was Margaret Bracken Kelly, Frances Wallace Kelly, and the youngest, Patricia. Now, Patricia seems to have missed out on having a street named after her initially, but later on, Frances Street was kind of divided into 2 different streets, and one of those was renamed Fincastle, and one of them was renamed Patricia. So then Frances was missing out. And Margaret Street was later changed to Medina Street. Sherlock and Bracken were also family names, so they were the maiden names of Margaret and Simon's mothers. So obviously their children had been given those names as middle names, and they also had that family connection to their mothers, which I think is a lovely tribute. And the family name and the family history now lives on in some of the names of that area, which is just wonderful. Now, this is just going to sound like a blatant plug for my Redbubble site, because it is, but that Coniston Park Estate is actually on my Redbubble site. And if you don't know Redbubble, it's a site where I can upload historical images. I have uploaded historical images into my shop, and you can then have them printed on whatever you want. Basically, you can have them printed to hang on your wall, framed, or on canvas. You can have them printed on shirts. You can have printed on gift cards or postcards, anything you want, homewares, whatever you want. So that Coniston Park Estate is available in the Redbubble store if you like, as well as a heap of other estate images. So you can jump on there and see if your suburb is on there. I'm continually adding more. There's hundreds to add. And also I've got a lot of old images and maps of Brisbane on there if you're interested as well. Okay, that's the end of that hard sell. There you go. That was a brief history of the Coniston Park Estate. Surely you found that interesting. Boom tish. So I've talked about the military camp, I've talked about the Coniston Park Estate. Let's talk about the house I was hired to research. A gentleman called John Maunder Murray bought 3 blocks of land in that Coniston Park Estate, and in October 1940 he applied to the Brisbane City Council for building permission to construct a new house on his land. And very conveniently, that building application record lists the builder that he was going to use, which was H.W. Kratzmann. Now, the Murrays were living in their house by May 1941, which means that the house was probably built most likely in the first half of 1941 or very end of 1940. So that's fantastic that we have a bit of a date range there. Now, this was not just any old standard Brisbane house. There was no timber or tin to be seen. It was a masonry building, and it had terracotta roof tiles. It was 2 stories, which was almost unheard of in Brisbane at the time. It was so luxurious and so modern. In fact, it was so striking that it was actually featured in the newspaper at the time. The person who wrote the article sounds like they were pretty blown away by the entire house. They talk about not only the sleek design of the house and how modern and cutting edge it was, but they talk about the clever planning and layout of the rooms, and that everything's been thought of for privacy and convenience. They discuss the beautiful silky oak staircase, which I stalked the real estate photos so I could have a peek inside. And as you can see, it's a gorgeous, it looks very Art Deco almost. It's got that solid balustrade, which was really popular in the 30s, and it's just absolutely stunning. And I'm really happy to see A, it's still there, and B, no one's painted over the silky oak, at least at the time where these photos were taken. It raves about the colours and the patterns of the wallpaper in the home, and it specifies what paint colours everything was. It had a fireplace. It talks about how it had a guest bathroom on the ground floor. Now, when this house was built in the 1940s, most houses in Brisbane still had an outdoor dunny in the backyard. So firstly, this house had indoor plumbing, but secondly, it had multiple toilets in the house, flushing toilets in the house, which was unheard of, which would have just been mind-blowing at the time to most people in Brisbane. It had a laundry, it had a garage. Now in the 1940s, most people in Brisbane still couldn't afford a car, so most people didn't have garages, and this is so modern that it included that as well, which is a great reflection of just how wealthy the owners must have been that built it. It also had a sun deck, and it had an amazing modern kitchen. Now, the article talks about the fitted cupboards in this kitchen, and by that they mean the built-in cupboards. So That's so common to us now. Like, we can't imagine a kitchen with freestanding furniture, but in the 30s and 40s, built-in kitchens were only just starting to become a thing. Prior to that, you would have had those kind of hutches you would have seen with the plates displayed standing up and then drawers underneath, and you would have had a big freestanding table that was basically used for everything, for eating and food prep. But built-in cupboards were not really popular and standard until after the Second World War. So this was incredibly modern for the time, and unfortunately there's only sort of a very grainy black and white photo, but you get an idea of just how slick and modern this kitchen would have been. And they talk about the green and white tiles and how lovely it was, and they talk about the enamel cabinets. So I don't know if that means that all the cabinets were actually made of enamel. That would have been quite unusual, but it just sounds absolutely incredible, and I wish I could have seen the original kitchen. Unfortunately, it's been replaced, as have the bathrooms, and that's not really surprising. The bathrooms that were built in the 1940s and kitchens are not going to be up to our modern standards and are probably worn out by now. But absolutely remarkable, that a remarkably modern kitchen. Luckily, apart from the bathroom and the kitchen, really very little has been changed on this house since it was built. The only major change is that the former sun deck has been enclosed to form another room, but I did spy in the real estate photos that the original terrazzo floor is still there, which is fantastic. So yeah, really cool to see this amazing house is still relatively intact, it's still there, and just to uncover this incredible history of it being built as part of the Coniston Park Estate, and just how much money the Murrays must have had to be able to afford this wonderful home. If you have been watching all my YouTube episodes, as you should be, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of them. You may remember that in episode 25, I talked about how I was researching a building that used to be on Brunswick Street. It's now number 505 Brunswick Street. And I was trying to find a photo of the mansion that used to be on this block. It was demolished in, I think, the early 1980s, and it's now the site of what's called Third Space. It's a homeless support centre, and I volunteer there. It's incredible. They offer such a great service. So I volunteered, it's their 50th anniversary this year, and I volunteered to put a bit of a history together for them to capture their amazing story. So their building was built on this block from 1986 to 1987, and I was looking at what was on the site prior to this place being built, and having looked at some sewerage plans and some post office directories, I discovered that there was a building there called Esram Villa. And all I had been able to find was these kind of blurry images of it caught in the very background of larger images of the Story Bridge or of Fortitude Valley, and I'd zoomed right in and stuff, and I could get a sense of it being a two-story, very fancy house, but that was about it. So I mentioned that I was still on the hunt for photos. Well, the amazing Tracy Lee, she went away after watching this, and she found a photo that captured the mansion from the front, and it was another photo of the Story Bridge, but it was at the National Library of Australia, which I hadn't got to searching yet. So amazing, Tracy Lee sent this through to me, and I basically squealed with the excitement when I saw it. I could not believe it. So that is absolutely wonderful. So I'm showing that here now so you can just see how cool it is. It captures the mansion, and it also captures a few of the other buildings either side along Brunswick Street too. So it's a great documentation of this strip of the street. So thank you so much, Tracy Lee. I really appreciate it. So as I mentioned, if you follow my social media, you would have seen that I was lucky enough to go to a reception at Government House at Paddington, also known as Fernberg, which is the official residence of the Governor of Queensland. And I was beyond excited to go here because I have been once before to an open day where I just wandered around the grounds, and I've been to another function there many years before. But this was going to be a couple of talks by the National Trust of Queensland and a tour of the house. Now, disappointingly, I was not allowed to take any videos or photos within the house, but I thought that I would have a look when I got home for some old photos of the house and see what I could uncover. And then I thought, well, I should share the history on here because I'm sure that you will all be interested in hearing about it as well. So I took a bit of a deep dive into it and I managed to uncover quite a few old photos, which was great. And I've uncovered some photos that someone else has taken of the interior on an open day as well that I can share here. So this house, and I discussed this house a little bit in the video I did with Rob from Walkabout with Rob, where we did the Rosalie tour. If you've watched that, you will be familiar with that because we started here at Government House. Now, Government House, obviously super impressive, but it was actually built as a private family residence in about 1865. So you can imagine how impressive it would have been back then. It was built by a gentleman called Johann Christian Häusler. And if the name Häusler sounds familiar, that's because there's a Häusler terrace in Milton and Paddington, and that was named for Johann. He was German and he was very, very wealthy, as you can probably tell by the size and design of the house and the fact it was built from masonry. And he commissioned well-known architect Benjamin Backhouse to design this home for him. As I mentioned, I found a couple of drawings of this house, and one of them is this beautiful watercolour, which is thought to be the original design by Benjamin Backhouse. Now, I'm not sure if this was how it was built because, as I'll discuss, a later owner made quite significant changes to the property, but it is just such a beautiful drawing. And if I was Häusler, I would have had massive wraparound verandas like this design has too, because it has the most spectacular views from the top of that hill. And apparently Fernberg, which is what Häusler christened the home, actually means distant mountain in German. I don't know if that's true. Maybe some of you speak German and you can tell me whether that's true or not, but it sounds like a beautiful name anyway, and it's still referred to by that name as well. And if you know that area, you will know that it sits on Fernberg Road, so it gave its name to that road as well. As you can see, it would have just been the most striking house up on top of this hill. It would have been surrounded by beautiful bushland because he owned a huge parcel of land. And in fact, most of that land is still intact as part of the grounds of Government House, which is amazing because pretty much every other huge villa property in Brisbane that sat on a huge parcel of land has had it cut into and is sitting on a much more reduced parcel. So this is really impressive. And if you ever get a chance to wander around the grounds there, it is just gorgeous. It's been maintained really well. In the 1880s, Fernberg was purchased by John Stevenson. He was a wealthy pastoralist and a political powerhouse, and he basically went full reno mode on Fernberg, and he doubled the size of the house and gave it a bit of an Italian mansion makeover, which you can definitely see. The Italianate style was very popular in the 1880s, and he's really run with that. So it would have been even more impressive sitting up on this hill, this shiny white monolith. He added a gym, he added stables, he added aviary and a tennis court, of course, you know, the wealthy need their tennis courts to play on. Poor old Stevenson though, he lost all his money in the 1890s financial crash and had to give up Fernberg. So this gentleman, Walter Russell Hall, had made all his money from gold mining. He swooped in and bought the home, but never actually lived there apparently. So I don't know, real estate speculation, just a rich person thing to own big fancy houses, I don't know, but he bought it. Now in 1910, Queensland needed a new vice-regal residence. So up to this point, old Government House had been the official residence of the governor, and this still survives. It's located now it's located as part of the QUT campus at Gardens Point near the Botanical Gardens. When it was built, it was situated in the massive gardens that surrounded it on all sides, and it would have been an absolutely beautiful setting, but it was quite old. It was considered not really up to scratch for the Queen's representative in Australia, or the King's representative in Australia. And so they decided to try and find a much more prestigious and appropriate residence for the governor to live in. And subsequently that building became the university, and as I said, it's still part of Queensland University of Technology today. So it was decided that Fernberg at Paddington would become the temporary residence of the governor in 1910, and spoiler alert, over 100 years later it is still the residence of the governor, so not exactly temporary. Of course, over the years, there's been lots of changes to the buildings by different governors, and as needs change, that type of thing. But the most substantial changes were undertaken in the 1930s. If you look at old floor plans of the building, and I found these incredible ones online which show what the house looked like at that stage, you can see that although it's a very grand and large home for a family, it's not really big enough to accommodate the official guests and the official events that a governor needs to host. So in the 1930s, they decided to add on a huge reception room and expand the house quite significantly, which is what they did. And that footprint is essentially what survives to this day. There's been a few other changes here and there, and additions and renovations and that type of thing, but effectively that size that they expanded it to in the 30s is what is there now. I also found these 3 photos of the interior from 1950, which I just think they're so cool. They show the interiors of the reception room and a couple of other rooms, and it's just so wonderful, A, to see these cool old photos, but B, because you can see how little it has actually changed in that time. Now, I was just in heaven walking around this place on the tour. It is so spectacular. It's absolutely incredible. One of the most striking features is a huge lead light window of Robert the Bruce, and that is in the stairwell. It is absolutely stunning. The other wonderful features are the ceiling roses. So there's a couple of them around. There's one in the governor's private office, which we got to have a look in, and there's a couple in the reception rooms as well, and they are absolutely stunning. And what I love about them is often ceiling roses are just painted all white and they just blend with the rest of the ceiling. These are picked out in beautiful colors, and it just makes them look so beautiful, and I've never seen any others like it. They are absolutely gorgeous. So if you ever get a chance to tour Government House, I highly recommend it, and they are open for tours. I think it's free. I think you might have to book though, and they have wonderful volunteer guides that will take you through the house. So I'll put a link to that in the description, so if you want to go and have a look for yourself, you can. They also host a number of open days throughout the year, and a little birdie told me while we were there that on perhaps some of these open days or some of the tours this year, you might even get to see the second story, which is where the bedrooms are, and most of the time you're not allowed to go up there. We weren't allowed to go up there on this visit, so that would truly be something special to see in there. So make sure you keep an eye on the website and their Facebook page to see if that happens. And if you just want to wander around the grounds, they offer some tours of that as well, and that's open on open days, and they have live music, and it's just so beautiful. It is such an oasis in the heart of the city. I highly recommend you get along there. Okay, you can tell that I kind of love this place, but anyway, it's not without reason. It's a unique property, and it's got a fascinating history. Well, there you go. From a modern 1930s house in Moorooka and a military camp during Second World War, photos of houses on Brunswick Street, and a incredible house that is now the official governor's residence. We've covered a lot in this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching, and yes, I'm going to harass you again because I would love it if you could hit on that subscribe button, and it means you won't miss any of my future episodes either. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.